I mentioned on the Jacobin show last week that I actually recently moved to Albuquerque, New Mexico. And if you're following kind of electoral news, you might have seen that in this district last week, there was a special election to fill former Representative Deb Haaland's open congressional seat. Deb Haaland, of course, is now the Secretary of the Interior. So in this race, the Democratic candidate, whose name is Melanie Stansbury, ultimately won in a landslide. On one hand, this was not a huge surprise, given that this has been a pretty solidly blue district for about a decade. However, Melanie Stansbury was up against a Republican challenger who tried to hit her hard on Albuquerque's rising crime rates and paint her as a supporter of defunding the police. Now, as a result, even though on many measures, Stansbury is a progressive who supports Medicare for all, a $15 minimum wage, and paid family leave, her TV ads leading up to the election looked like this.
I'm District Attorney Raul Torres. I work every day to make this community safer for business and families. That's why I'm supporting Melanie Stansbury for Congress. She's been a strong partner for law enforcement, helping to deliver millions in training, equipment, and salaries for local police. I know she'll have our back in Congress, and that's why I have her back. Please join me in voting for Melanie.
Gunshot detection, radios, rape kit technology. Melanie Stansbury delivered the tools we need to fight violent crime in Albuquerque. In fact, Melanie helped coordinate public safety funding for the entire metro area. These ads are lies.
Mark Moores opposed President Biden's American Rescue Plan, money for families and small businesses, and millions for local law enforcement. Yet Moores took nearly $2 million in PPP money for his own business.
I'm Melanie Stansbury, and I approve this message because New Mexico always comes first.
So honestly, I don't exactly blame her for being skittish around this topic. Homicides in Albuquerque have doubled since last year. On a very anecdotal level, within a week of arriving here in the city, I was warned multiple times by neighbors and others about the increase in crime. And of course, policing is, as ever, a highly contentious topic. Now, Albuquerque isn't the only city in the US that's seen both an increase in violent crime and the rumblings of a law and order backlash. Recently, progressive Philadelphia District Attorney Larry Krasner faced a primary challenge from an opponent who attacked him for being soft on crime and said this during a debate.
Mr. Krasner, you have blood on your hands. Milan Lonkar, a young man walking his dog. Trevon Register, 6-year-old boy beaten to death. Samar Jones, 7-year-old boy killed on his porch. Corporal O'Connor, killed in the line of duty. Gladys Coriano, a domestic violence victim, shot in front of her house. Dominic Bila, young man shot in the Franklin Mills Mall. These are just a few of the victims that we can directly put on the incompetence of Larry Krasner. Krasner says he doesn't want to go back to the past, but we have a murder rate and violence rate that rivals the 1990s. Larry has failed to provide real reform.
So, like Melanie Stansbury in New Mexico, Krasner won his race with a resounding majority of votes despite all of this fear-mongering. I think that these are pretty promising signs that even in the face of increasing crime, as of right now, Democratic voters in many cities don't seem to be as persuaded by law and order messaging as they were in, say, the 70s or 80s. However, there are also some indications that things can easily go the other way when voters are worried about public safety and officials offer few positive solutions. This can happen even in a notoriously progressive city. Just look at Austin, Texas. So last month in Austin, 58% of voters passed Proposition B, an initiative that reinstated a ban on homeless camping within city limits. Here's what that's going to mean for Austin's homeless population.
58% of people voted for the ban to be reinstated. Once the ordinance goes into effect, it'll once again be a misdemeanor for anyone to sit, lie down, or camp in public areas of Austin. Panhandling at night will also be banned. According to Austin Mayor Steve Adler, the ordinance would go into effect starting May 11th, once the election is certified.
So why did a clear majority of voters in a famously liberal city vote in favor of reinstating these kinds of punitive measures, especially when the same city ended the camping ban just 2 years ago in an effort to decriminalize homelessness? There were a few different factors at work this year. For one thing, it was an off-year election, which meant that voter turnout was low. Only about a quarter of Austin residents cast ballots last month, and unsurprisingly, wealthier areas of the city with higher levels of turnout were more likely to vote in favor of the ban. Secondly, Save Austin Now, which was the political group behind the push to reinstate the camping ban, poured over $1 million from wealthy donors and business interests into the race. Although dozens of progressive and left-leaning advocates, ranging from organizations like the Working Families Party to high-profile politicians like Beto O'Rourke, joined the fight against Proposition B, Save Austin Now outspent the Vote No campaign by nearly 10-1. Now, these factors obviously made defeating the proposition an uphill battle from the start, but that said, there was something else that may have flipped voters this year. The unfortunate truth is that other than decriminalizing homeless camping, the city of Austin failed to address the homelessness crisis in any meaningful way in the 2 years between when the camping ban was struck down and now. One consequence was that between 2019 and 2021, tents and garbage proliferated across parks and public spaces. At least one serious fire broke out at an encampment. A number of people reported harassment or violent incidents around the camps, and yet no substantive progress was made on getting the homeless into permanent housing. According to the Austin American-Statesman, in the past 2 years, the city purchased 4 hotels or motels to convert into housing at a combined cost of about $33 million and backed out of plans to buy another one. It also pulled the plug on buying a building in South Austin to turn into a shelter. It rejected calls to open sanctioned campsites, believing them to be expensive and difficult to maintain. An effort led by the Austin Chamber of Commerce to acquire and operate a 300-bed tent shelter fizzled when the nonprofit it helped create raised just $1.4 million of a $14 million 2-year goal. Moreover, the city went a full year with an interim replacement before hiring a lead official tasked with directing the city's homelessness response. Over the last 10 years, we've never had a single plan everyone could agree to, Mayor Steve Adler said. So in other words, the city all but created the conditions for a voter backlash. By decriminalizing camping, but then only making half-hearted attempts to actually house people, let alone guarantee them medical treatment, financial assistance, and jobs, city officials effectively said to the public, it's on you now to make peace with Austin's homelessness crisis. Unsurprisingly, the situation created a lot of ambivalence among many voters. Take a look at this interview from Vice with 2 Austin residents in the lead up to the election.
Lifting the ban was not a solution, but putting the ban back in place isn't a solution either. I don't think either one of them are solutions.
So what is the solution?
Well, a lot of money in housing. I don't know. I mean, most big cities are having these problems.
What do you think is going to happen with the vote?
I don't know, because I mean, if you talk to Donnie's friends, they're going to all vote against it. Most of my friends that I know, and even some fairly liberal friends are going to, vote to reinstate the ban.
I think I'm going to vote against it, just so I have, but I hope there's a lot of people that vote for it. And that's weird to say. Like, it troubles me that I just said that.
Because you want to feel good about how you vote, but you want it to go away.
It's messed up. I don't want them arrested. I don't want them put in a van and driven to another neighborhood, because then that neighborhood's just got a problem. That's not the answer.
Do you think if you had seen this issue happening in another city and it wasn't happening in your neighborhood, you would feel differently?
Once you're in the middle of it, you change your mind of how you approach the situation. But as your safety declines, so does your compassion. Every time I have to pick up human shit, my liberalness just got lowered one more notch.
So the point here is this. Though, of course, you can find plenty of right-wingers wherever you go, I have a hunch that the majority of Austin residents are not heartless ideologues who want to cruelly punish the homeless for simply existing. This is, after all, a city that voted for Bernie Sanders in the Democratic primaries twice, aka the presidential candidate that proposed a national housing for all plan with $32 billion earmarked to end homelessness. Rather, the passage of Proposition B in Austin was the result of city leadership neglecting its obligation to guarantee its residents the basic provisions of a decent life, housing, jobs, and an adequate social safety net, as I said before, but also public safety, clean streets, and green space. As a result, enough of the better off ultimately voted in their own interests rather than continue a dysfunctional status quo. The unfortunate outcome is that Austin's homeless will once more face criminal punishment for being homeless. I think this is an important case study because there are several other liberal cities like Los Angeles, San Francisco, and New York that are currently grappling with their own homelessness crises and or spikes in violent crime. In California, where, of course, Governor Gavin Newsom is facing a recall election, homelessness has emerged as one of voters' biggest concerns. On the other coast, the topic of crime continues to dominate local elections. As Bloomberg News reported on the New York mayoral race, an increase in hate crimes, subway assaults, and shootings have become central to the race. Brooklyn Borough President Eric Adams and former presidential contender Andrew Yang called for more police officers on city streets and transit systems, while civil rights lawyer Maya Wiley and former educator Diane Morales advocated for redirecting funds from the force. Former City Sanitation Commissioner Catherine Garcia said she would focus on gun buybacks and stopping the flow of firearms into New York. In other words, though some US cities could very well avoid a law and order backlash in the coming months, others might not be so lucky. So Anna, I know that you're based in Los Angeles, which of course is one of the cities that, I name checked at the end. I know that there is a kind of big homeless crisis right now that's only gotten worse during the pandemic. So just kind of reporting from the ground there, like what are you seeing and what are your thoughts on what's going on and how it might affect electoral politics in the future?
I have to say, listening to your decode was really cathartic because in Los Angeles, in California overall, like there's just a very similar trend of, essentially what we did in California is the same thing that Austin did. They lifted a ban on outdoor camping during the coronavirus pandemic. We see this explosion of, encampments, especially in Los Angeles, everywhere. I mean, you can't find a freeway bridge that doesn't have a giant homeless encampment under it. You're right in mentioning the crime and also the public drug use. There is human excrement on the sidewalks. I one time was walking my dog and there was a homeless man literally like on a main street squatting and doing his business. And so these are actually very legitimate concerns. And what we're noticing with liberal policy is this situation where they set people up for failure, right? So we're not going to do anything in terms of providing permanent, stable housing, but we are going to lift a ban on camping. And then it gets to a point where well-intentioned people who actually want to do the right thing get so tired of the crime, they get so tired of the squalor and all of that stuff that they end up moving to the right on the issue. And that's what we want to prevent, right? I think what you and Paul Prescott did in the Jacobin episode on crime was so important. And it was because what you guys did was focus on this specifically when it comes to crime. You know, if the left doesn't have a real solution, a robust solution, an alternative to tough on crime policy, we're very quickly going to go back to the policies of the 1990s that were just meant to punish people, had no interest in rehabilitation, no interest in treatment. We're seeing that now. In California, we started to release nonviolent offenders from the prison system, but just releasing people from prison isn't even half the equation. It's literally the first step. What is the state providing to help people transfer or transition, I should say, to society? You know, if you've been imprisoned for years and you've just been let out, if you don't have a support system, if the government doesn't have the proper social safety net in place, you're just being set up to fail.
Exactly.
So I love your segment. It's so important.
Yeah, I mean, I just want to reiterate again, like we should be clear. It is the state's obligation to provide these services for people. It's the state's obligation, or it should be the state's obligation to provide housing, to provide jobs, to provide a decent social safety net, to, as you were saying, reintegrate people who have been in the criminal justice system back into society. And I think when the state only goes halfway or, just takes the first step, as you said, it really does create a situation where not just that the people who are homeless or, released from prison are set up to fail, but it also ends up inadvertently, as we've seen in Austin, pitting them against people who are a little bit better off, who understandably are worried about, crime, who are worried about cleanliness. And I just want to say, for the record, when it comes to homeless violent crime, like we know that the vast majority of victims of crimes committed by homeless people are other homeless people. So, I want to be clear that there's no wave of homeless people attacking good tax-paying citizens or anything like that. But the point here is that if there's a perception that things are not safe, if there's a perception that people, don't feel comfortable around these homeless encampments, I think that does translate into a voter backlash. And I just want to add, one last thing, which is that it is the state's obligation, I believe, as I said before. It's not the responsibility of the community or every citizen to fix the homelessness crisis, I'm sorry to say. And I think that, progressives have a really hard task because, we want to decriminalize homelessness, obviously. Nobody should be punished for sitting under a bridge. Obviously, fining people is just going to exacerbate the problem. People shouldn't be thrown in jail just for being homeless. That said, when I was looking into the Austin situation, I did notice that a lot of the, the messaging from the Vote No campaign, which did not want to repeal the homeless camping ban, was, again, this is not a criticism of them. They were in a very tough position for the reasons I outlined, but a lot of the messaging was kind of well, it's rich assholes who don't like these homeless encampments. It's wealthy gentrifiers who come into Austin and they don't like the sight of tents, or they just think that the tents are an eyesore. And of course those people exist. We know that they do. We know that rich assholes are everywhere. But I think, the larger point with Austin is that I don't think that that can explain the entirety of the voter backlash to the homeless camping. And I also think, if we're serious about trying to forge a coalition to not just, end homelessness, but also to strike down criminalization of homelessness, I don't think it goes very far, or I wonder how far it goes to just say, oh, it's rich assholes who don't like this, or it's rich assholes who are behind this initiative.
I mean, honestly, that messaging does the work of the right wing on these types of issues, because you're, needlessly antagonizing people who you can persuade to be on your side, to actually force the state to take responsibility and build the housing that's necessary, right? So I think messaging is so important on this issue. And what it does is it essentially minimizes the genuine and sincere concerns that people have. Everyone wants to be able to enjoy public spaces. They want to be able to enjoy parks, and if they're unable to do that, it's very easy for their mentality to shift toward wanting to provide shelter for people, to wanting to demonize people and see them as the problem. Mm-hmm. And just one other quick thing. Thank you for that clarification regarding homelessness and crime. I think it's an important one. And in California, for instance, we have a similar situation with progressive activists using similar messaging. And one thing that we've been noticing is there have been small fires throughout LA County, just incessantly. There's several of them every single day. And it's because of, one homeless person feeling that they've been wronged by another homeless person. They'll literally set their tents on fire. And we're living in California with an insanely dry climate. We're entering, wildfire season. It's just a recipe for disaster. People are frustrated. People are angry. And just like the point that you guys were making with the left needing a real robust solution, an alternative to the issue with crime, we need the same when it comes to housing. And so I love this. I think it's an important topic. And, I'm glad that we're tackling homelessness, on the show today. It's one of the topics I care the most about.